There are certain stories that cross over from folklore into pop culture, stories so shocking that they take root in our collective imagination. In 1973, The Exorcist hit theaters. Audiences fainted, vomited, and screamed their way through what would become one of the most famous horror films of all time. But what many people don't realize is this: it wasn't just a scary movie. It was based on a real case of alleged possession. Not of a girl, as in the movie, but of a 14-year-old boy. A boy who lived in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., and whose terrifying ordeal eventually brought him to St. Louis, Missouri, where Jesuit priests would conduct one of the most famous exorcisms in American history. Tonight we're going to dive deep into the true story behind The Exorcist. We'll separate fact from legend, look at the people involved, and explore why this case still baffles believers, skeptics, and scientists today. And don't worry, we'll throw in some humor along the way. Because, let's be real, if we're talking about head-spinning, bed-shaking, pea-soup-vomiting demons for an hour and a half straight without a single joke, we might all need an exorcism by the end. The boy behind the story. The case began in the winter of 1949 in Cottage City, Maryland. The possessed wasn't a girl, like in the movie, but a boy known in records as Roland Doe or Robbie Mannheim. His real identity has never been publicly confirmed, partly to protect the family's privacy, and partly because the church wanted to minimize sensationalism. Roland was described as quiet, shy, and deeply attached to his Aunt Harriet. She introduced him to the Ouija board, which they often played together. When she passed away suddenly, Roland was devastated. Soon after, strange phenomena began to occur in his home, scratching sounds in the walls, furniture moving on its own, objects flying across rooms, and most famously, his mattress shaking violently while he tried to sleep. Now let's pause here. If my bed suddenly started levitating, I wouldn't be calling a priest. I'd be calling the landlord and demanding a serious rent discount. Roland's parents were terrified. They turned first to doctors and psychiatrists, but no medical explanation was found. So, like many families of that era, they turned to their Lutheran minister, who suggested they contact the Catholic Church. The first attempts at exorcism. In late January 1949, priests began investigating Roland's case. They witnessed scratches appearing on his body, words like evil and hell etched into his skin, seemingly from within. One particularly chilling moment, the word Louis appeared carved into his torso. His family took this as a sign they needed to travel to St. Louis, Missouri, where relatives lived and where the church could take stronger action. When Roland arrived in St. Louis, Jesuit priests at St. Louis University were contacted. Among them was Father William Bodern, who would become the lead exorcist in this case. Bodern was no rookie. He was a respected priest, war veteran, and professor. But even he admitted later, this case tested him in ways he never imagined. The priests began the rite of exorcism, an ancient Catholic ritual meant to drive out demonic forces. Over weeks, they reported terrifying manifestations, Roland speaking in Latin, though he had never studied it. His voice shifting, deepening, sometimes sounding like multiple people speaking at once. Violent reactions to holy water and crucifixes. And even superhuman strength, throwing grown men off him during the rituals. Now, I don't know about you, but if a 14-year-old boy starts growling in Latin while tossing adults across the room like rag dolls, that's the moment I'm like, you know what? The demon can keep the house. I'm moving to Florida. The climax of the exorcism. The exorcisms stretched on for weeks, sometimes daily. The priests recorded their observations in journals, which later became the foundation for William Peter Blatty's novel, The Exorcist. At times, Roland seemed to calm down, only for violent fits to return hours later. Priests reported seeing the mattress levitate. They saw scratches form in real time. One of the most famous incidents happened at the Alexian Brothers Hospital in St. Louis. During the final session, Roland reportedly screamed out in a strange voice, declaring, "Satan, Satan," before collapsing. According to the priest's journals, at that moment, he shouted a vision of Saint Michael the Archangel appearing, driving the demon away. Afterward, Roland collapsed into peaceful sleep. From that day forward, the possession was considered ended. Roland returned to a normal life, went back to school, and, by all accounts, never experienced anything supernatural again. Skeptics and explanations, of course. Not everyone buys the demonic possession angle. Skeptics have suggested alternative explanations. Psychological illness. Perhaps Roland was suffering from mental disorders like schizophrenia. Grief response. Remember, this all started after the death of his beloved aunt. Family hysteria. In the close quarters of 1940s suburban homes, fear can spread quickly. Exaggeration. Some argue the priest's journals may have embellished details, knowingly or unknowingly. But even skeptics admit one thing. Too many credible witnesses reported bizarre phenomena for the case to be dismissed entirely. And that's why this story remains in the gray zone between faith, psychology, and the unknown. Look, maybe it was demons, maybe it was mental illness, or maybe Roland just really didn't want to do his homework. I mean, if I had discovered that growling in Latin would get me out of math class, I would have tried it too. The pop culture impact. When William Peter Blatty published The Exorcist in 1971, he based it directly on Roland's case. The novel became a bestseller. 2 years later, the film adaptation hit theaters and changed horror forever. It terrified audiences, pushed boundaries, and solidified the exorcism trope in movies for decades to come. Even today, the house in St. Louis where parts of the exorcism took place is considered haunted, and paranormal investigators still flock there. The legend lives on, not just as a story of possession, but as a reminder of how fear, faith, and mystery can capture the human imagination. So, what really happened to Roland Doe? Was it a genuine case of demonic possession? A psychological breakdown amplified by fear? Or a mix of both? The truth may never be known. What we do know is this: his case sparked one of the greatest horror stories ever told. It forced people to question what's real, what's imagined, and what might exist just beyond the veil of our understanding. Whether you're a skeptic or a believer, the story of the Exorcist case reminds us of one thing. Sometimes the scariest stories are the ones rooted in truth. And if you're watching this at night, maybe sleep with the lights on, just in case.